Consider that your official warning that you are being recorded. Heads up. Okay, I'm going to get started, and as people find us, they can hop right in it, and that'll be just fine. Starting at the end. Gotta start at the beginning. Take two. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are coming from, I suppose. Welcome to Solutions Journalism 101, Bridging the Hope Gap. My name is Lainey Presswood, and I am delighted to be your host / facilitator for the evening. Quick rundown of where we are going over the next 40 or so minutes. I'm going to introduce myself. That's where we are currently. We're going to do a quick exercise to identify some gaps in social understandings. I'm going to talk about what solutions journalism actually is. We're going to put that concept into practice for a moment. Then I'm going to pull that back to you lovely people and talk about how this new form of solutions-oriented journalism impacts news readers, why it's important, and what you all can do about it. So first things first, as mentioned, I am Lainey Presswood. I am the Higher Education Program Specialist at the Solutions Journalism Network. You ended up listening to me because I am the only one who thinks it's fun to be on camera and speaking to groups of people, and everyone else think that's a little too close to visiting dentist. So I work mostly with, as the title implies, university and some high school and other nonprofit educators. But I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years working with the Solutions Journalism Network at large, thinking about how we can change the way that the public, whether that's young adults or older adults and anyone of any age really, can change the way they interact with the news, which is going to be highly topical to what we are talking about today. I was supposed to have a co-presenter here with me, and as you know, there are 2 pandemics flying around, and he had a family health emergency. So now it's just me, and I'm saying that to remind you that that means if you have some sort of question, comment, or concern, you might just have to unmute yourself and shout it out because I don't have anyone monitoring the chat. So I will do my best, and I will take breaks to check in on the chat if someone has dropped questions in there. But if you really need something, just come off of mute and yell at me, and we will figure it out from there. So with no further ado, this is a quick screenshot of the Gapminder homepage. Gapminder is a Swedish nonprofit that has this really cool array of different quizzes and tests, like a social justice BuzzFeed to assess popular knowledge about high impact issues, right? Like you can see them here. What like the plastic in the oceans is actually like global warming, global poverty. What is like global gender parity looking like? And they're doing this because the way that we systematically perceive issues like equity and climate change are generally not particularly accurate. I'm not going to say anything else yet to get us started. And instead, I'm going to drop this link in the chat. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes just to take this little quiz. It's 12 questions. Don't think too hard about it. I'm not going to do anything with those results. I just want to see what your immediate impulses are. I pulled these questions off of Gapminder's official website into a Google form just so they are easier for us to work with. But again, all credit to Gapminder. This is their content. So give it a click. Come back at 6:20 for me. 4 minutes. I would play Jeopardy music if I had it. Come on. 2 minutes remaining. One minute remaining. All right, come on back for me. If you didn't finish it, click through the rest of the questions real fast, submit it. Before we get to the results of that, I would like to know from anyone who feels comfortable volunteering that information, how do you identify as a news consumer? Do you consider yourself someone who reads a lot of news, reads the news daily, checks in on the news sometimes, doesn't read the news at all, actively avoids the news? Maybe we'll see some news if it happens to cross your sight line. How do you interact with the news? You can say it out loud, you can put it in the chat. I will call on people. I will do that. I would prefer not to, though. This isn't even the hard part, folks.
I'm happy to share.
Yes, please, Julia.
These days, I just skim the headlines, and when I see something that's of interest, I'll dig deeper. Of interest, meaning I can bear it.
Yes.
Or it seems relevant.
We've got David in the chat saying only occasionally or when convenient. Is there anyone who considers themselves like a high consumer of news? Simon. Simon, are you telling us to be quiet, or are you reminding yourself to be quiet? Either's fine. I'm just curious.
Yes, sorry, I'm not able to talk at the moment. I've got a few things on, but I'm just trying to listen in. Oh, I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
Oh, sorry, I've just got a few things on, so I've just going on quiet, but I'm listening in.
Got it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
I was just entertained by the display name. Okay, so not really a whole lot of people identifying right now as particularly high impact news consumers, which is pretty reflective of where the general American populace sits right now. I'm going to talk a lot about US news consumers today, just because that's where I and my organization are based, but a lot of the same trends are visible worldwide. You have people really tuning out of what's happening in the news and current events, largely because they just say it makes them feel bad, which is a super valid reason not to want to do things. And that takes us to that little Gapminder quiz we just took. Did anyone get all 12 of them correct? Anyone get 11 correct? 10? 9? More than 5? Often people will get maybe 2 out of the 12 of those questions correct, and it's directly correlated to the ways in which that news media shapes our impressions of the world around us. So we are so surrounded all the time by these impressions that the world is imminently going to end, that climate change is definitely going to kill all of us, that everyone living in the entire continent of Africa, if you're a white person living in America particularly, you think everyone living on the entire continent of Africa has no access to electricity, they don't have a house, they're living in a field, we must go rescue them. That is problematic for so many reasons that I don't have time to get into today, but most importantly for solutions journalism, it's just not true. And when we only see those stories that are talking about how girls across the world never go to school and like no one has access to healthcare, it creates this feeling that is the hope gap, that it's why should I even try to be informed about what is happening, let alone actually take an active stance to try and make situations better to improve my world or the world at large, or both ideally, if it's already so hopeless, if it's so far gone that like nothing I can do as one person will make a difference. It leads to apathy, it leads to people being checked out. And it's, again, just not true, right? So solutions journalism in a nutshell, and what I want to talk to you all about for the next half an hour, is really trying to get away from that. So I'm going to go back to sharing, and we're going to move on to the next component of our time together, which is what actually is solutions journalism. I keep throwing around that word. What does it really mean? So solutions journalism, the definition that we like to use is rigorous evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. So first things first, solutions journalism is still good reporting, but we are just shifting the lens of traditional investigative reporting. So the focus is not on the problem itself or who is being harmed, but rather on what is already being done to address the issue and move us all forward. Good solutions journalism, as we see it, rests on 4 pillars. So my organization, the Solutions Journalism Network, was founded in 2013 by Tina Rosenberg and David Bornstein, who worked a lot for the New York Times. Tina won a Pulitzer a couple years ago. They're amazing people. Now we have about 50 employees located all over the world, coast to coast in the US. So we have affiliates in Germany, France, South Korea. And most of the work that we do is in training reporters, not just print reporters, also TV and audio journalists, people doing multimedia, photo, digital work, on how to produce this kind of journalism. So first things first, to count as solutions journalism, the story needs to focus on the response. So the bulk of the story has to really be concerned about whatever that solution is. We want to know what it is. We want to know who is doing it. We want to know where it's happening. We want to know who is impacted, how they came up with it. All of that should really be the bulk of the story. Number 2, we want the story to contain evidence. So if Chicago passed a new law today, right now, that they said is going to completely eliminate gun violence in the city, that would be amazing. And I definitely want to know the details of that legislation. But as of right now, it doesn't count as a solution because there's no proof that it works. So maybe 2 years down the line, we can look backwards at the law and say, here's what has changed since this legislation went into effect. That would make it a solution. But time and impact have a huge part to play here. So when we're talking about evidence, we're counting quantitative and qualitative forms of data here. So we can take interviews with people who have been impacted by the problem, explaining how the solution has made a difference in their lives. We can take statistics, understanding how fewer people are impacted by the problem once the solution has been implemented, or maybe the severity of the problem has reduced. If it is one of those issues related to climate change, huge amount of solutions journalism in the ecological arena. We can take statistics of impact in terms of reductions in pollution percentages, maybe, but we still need evidence to be strongly present throughout the entirety of the story. So if a solution, for example, has multiple prongs, multiple phases, we still want to see evidence for all pieces of the solution. Which takes us to number 3, insight. Does your solution work for other people, other areas, other demographics, other realms of the problem? So I'm going to use that same example. If Chicago passes a piece of legislation that really somehow totally addresses the gun violence problem, 2 years down the line, they've seen like a real reduction in guns on the street, in actual shootings happening and people injured by gun violence. Will that same legislation also work in a city like Philadelphia? And why or why not? Is there something about the solution that is limiting it to one place and time? Or can it provide a blueprint for other people who are dealing with similar problems? I want to stress here that it's not a problem for us if the solution only works in one place and time. That's really cool. That still tells us things about what is unique about that population and that problem. But that's part of what makes a solutions journalism story rigorous and thoughtful, is that we want this third pillar, that insight category, to connect this particular solution to issues overall, or like broader attempts to move towards solving social problems, right? So we want to see it connected some way to a bigger frame. And that takes us to number 4, no solution is going to be perfect. Nothing is perfect. And the more someone tries to tell you something is perfect, the more suspicious we gotta be, right? So a good solutions journalism story is going to talk about the limitations to the approach. And you can think about limitations in terms of the 3 pillars we've already covered, right? So if it's that insight moment and the solution is limited to one place, that's a limitation. If you're lacking some sort of evidence in a particular category of impact, maybe you have that gun violence approach and it works really well for like older adult offenders, but for some reason it's not hitting like teenage or young adult offenders in the same way. Like that's an interesting limitation to focus on, but we do want to acknowledge whatever the problems are. So one more time to wrap it up. Solutions journalism is going to focus primarily on the response. We're foregrounding whatever the effort to solve the problem is. It shouldn't be putting a huge discussion of the problem and the history of the problem up front. 2, we need evidence, some form of data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, statistics, testimonials, all of that counts, to explain how the solution is already working, not how it might work in the future, but how it's working right now. We need insight to explain how that particular story can or can't impact other people, and then limitations about how the story is not perfect and how the solution maybe could be improved in the future. So I know that's a little vague, and I'm gonna wrap it down a little more tightly to talk for a moment now about what doesn't count as solutions journalism, because we get some sneaky imposters tossed toward us. We have a resource called the Solutions Story Tracker where we archive solutions journalism, and there's a couple easy things that make us say, you know what, this might be an amazing story, but this is definitely not solutions journalism. And I think understanding what a concept isn't can be a good way to understand what it actually is. So one common offender is what we like to call think tank journalism, which just is proposing an idea or a project that doesn't yet exist. So if you're thinking about those 4 pillars, which one is this one probably missing? Focus on the response, evidence, insight, limitations. I want to hazard a guess. Oh, you're so correct. Evidence, Dennis got it. Thank you, Dennis. Yes, it's evidence, right? So if you're just proposing a new problem solution, then there's no way to prove that it actually works. So this could be a good story, but this would count more along the lines of a press release. If someone has just put out a new plan, a new piece of legislation, a new idea, that's not a solution, you can't prove it's going to work. Number 2, hero worship. Any story that really just celebrates an individual at the expense of the idea behind their work. If there's only really one person cited through the entire story, especially if they're like a CEO or a founder, then high chances are that we're not foregrounding the right thing here, right? So pillar number 1, we really want to highlight the response. We can use characters, especially if they're really charismatic and they can pull attention, but they should always be used in support of understanding the solution itself. So if we are instead using the solution to leverage a particularly charismatic person, especially if they're like a billionaire, like if Lady Gaga somehow manages to solve climate change, we still care more about how the solution worked and not as much about Lady Gaga herself. Number 3, is the story actually just a magic bullet story? This also is sort of what we think about when someone might be putting out just like a feel-good or human interest story. Again, there's nothing wrong with those stories, but they're not solutions journalism. So especially in like tech, innovation, business sectors, if you're reading a story that's really, really flattering and glowing about some sort of new device or plan, especially if it's using a hyperbolic term like lifesavers, that oversimplifies complex issues. And solutions journalism, crucially here, is not trying to downplay problems. We're not denying that problems exist. That's why we like to use the phrase the whole story, right? So the problems are real. They impact a lot of people in really, really dangerous, problematic, important ways. And just saying something like, oh, well, this one tiny simple trick is going to change the entire world, like that's not helpful, right? So if you're saying like, oh, like a problem of like children being like preyed upon and abused is going to be totally solved by when they're out in the dark, they have a glow in the dark soccer ball, and then like no one will try and attack them and they can find their way home. Like that's pretty disingenuous about the many, many issues at play there. Right? So we are not trying to act like one tiny invention can fix a whole problem. And I'm going to take a moment to say here that to count as solutions journalism, you don't have to solve every problem in the world. I know that's a problem that especially the newer reporters, the younger reporters that I work with will fall into. So you can talk about like wind turbines, for example, and like how they're working to like revitalize the economy in a certain town in Indiana. And that can be both an economic and an environmental solution, but it's not fixing the entire American economy or the entire global scale for climate change. That doesn't mean it's not a solution. It just means we are carefully considering context. And once you put together one piece of a puzzle, right? If we think about the wind turbines in Indiana, then again, we can think about the insights, the limitations, and start to put together smaller pieces of the puzzle to solve the whole global scale of the problem. But one step at a time works just fine for us. We're big fans of that. Last one I want to talk about in a little bit of detail here is what we call the afterthought, which is just adding a paragraph or like a tiny soundbite at the end of a problem story to give lip service to solutions. Again, this could be and probably is an amazing story, like great long form content in The Atlantic or The Economist, The New York Times, whatever the paper might be. But if it's 3,000 words and only 100 at the end are like briefly talking about someone's proposed solution, it's just not a solutions story. I think it's great if people want to add in a hint towards a solution, but it's not solutions journalism. We really need that focus to be on the solution. That's the approach that changes people's minds about that hope gap and apathy problem. One more thing to say about this though, it is okay if stories happen serially. So a lot of the papers that we work with, especially the like mid-sized regional papers like Charlotte, North Carolina, for example, will work on local stories in a series. And the first piece of the series might just be about the problem, but that gives the paper time to write 2 or 3 or 4 follow-up solution stories. And again, that totally counts, right? We are not holding people to some sort of pristine, golden, one-size-fits-all standard. Again, we believe in problem. We want to see problems get covered, but we want to see solutions covered too, with equal seriousness and real thought. A couple extra imposters that I can throw in here, just really like faster. Public relations, anytime you're getting a press release from a specific organization, that's not solutions journalism. It can sometimes be part of a story, but just like those hero worship imposters, if you're just covering like one organization, that doesn't count as SOJO. And we do get kind of frequently emails from like nonprofits or like community organizing groups saying, hey, can you write stories about us? And first of all, we don't do that. We don't write stories. But second of all, no, you can pass this information about your efforts and maybe we can pass it forward to a journalist. But it really, we really are foregrounding solutions there, not just the organizations that are working. Instant activism, this is your, like any online petition you see that's like, oh my gosh, I just discovered that like sometimes people are abused and now I'm gonna write a petition and we're gonna solve that issue. Or political fundraising often kind of falls into the same umbrella. If you're seeing a super, super emotional plea and then a request for money, that is not solutions journalism. Don't be fooled. And then finally, one more time, any human interest piece, right? We love things that are cute. If there's like a dog who got hit by a car and now has a doggy wheelchair, like I'm happy someone is helping that dog get up and running again. That's not solutions journalism. Okay, I'm taking a pause here to look at the chat and ask if anyone has questions about what is and isn't solutions journalism before we see an example.
Can I ask a question about something you said? You said you work with newspapers, or you work with organizations. What does that mean to work with them?
Sure. The Solutions Journalism Network at large runs trainings. So basically exactly what I just did with you. We will talk about the pillars and we will walk through how to do interviewing in a way that like really leads people to feel comfortable opening up about this. We'll talk about the ways to find people who are doing this kind of work, which I'm going to circle back to a bit at the end of my presentation. Often it means approaching relationships with the community differently. So one of the things that's really antithetical to solutions journalism is parachute journalism. We really don't believe that you can just drop a stranger into a community that has been working intimately to solve a problem in their local town, city, and that you're going to be able to have a stranger cover that solution, right? So we really believe in grounding people inside their community, teaching them how to approach the people who have organic, authentic expertise, the people who might not have degrees or public acclaim, but have been doing community organizing, for example, for 30, 40 years. We are also like a mid-level granting organization. So we receive grants and then we have sub-grantees who want to do this sort of work. So some of that is topical and some of that is regional. So we have, for example, a cohort that runs in New England, primarily in like New Hampshire. And they say like, okay, we're gonna participate in a series of trainings and then they're going to receive a sub-grant from us to produce a certain number of solutions pieces. So we are never telling them what they need to cover. We're just a resource so that if they have questions about how to do the reporting and if they want extra eyes on their pieces, that's what we do. I specifically then take finished solutions journalism and package it for educators and like community discussion groups to use to better understand issues. Anything else?
I'm just wondering about how this evolved and how it's changed the outcome of journalism. Is that?
I think that's an excellent question. I'm going to come back to that at the end. Hold that for me, Beverly. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Let's. Who wants to watch a piece of solutions? Let's do this is just a 3-minute video clip, and it's not perfect. The longer pieces are better, but we are time limited, so we're going to watch this one. I might have to change my audio settings here. Can you hear that? I can't hear that either. No, I've done it now.
Do you need to click the little boxes on the Zoom thing? Two little boxes?
I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna reshare because sometimes it doesn't like it when you change the share sound. There we go.
Team.
Denver 911, what's the address of your emergency?
At Denver's 911 call center, the city is trying something new.
Saying she is having a mental health issue and wants assistance.
Diverting police away from emergency calls related to mental health or substance abuse. Instead, sending in the STAR team. A van with a licensed social worker and a medic dressed in plain clothes, trained to de-escalate and to help.
Compassion, support, non-judgment. We're really there to listen to people and listen to what they need.
It's called Support Team Assisted Response, or the STAR Team for short, a new pilot program seeking to divert nonviolent 911 calls away from armed police officers. The goal to help the city resolve issues related to mental health, homelessness, poverty, and substance abuse without involving the criminal justice system.
Police officers are trained in enforcing the law. You know, they go through a CIT class and they're trained to recognize and respond to behavioral health crisis, but it's not their area of focus, and this is my area of focus.
STAR is based on a decades-old program in Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots, but Denver is the biggest city in the country to implement the strategy so far.
And would you like
911 operators are trained to send a call to the STAR team when it falls under certain categories, like trespassing or a welfare check. Of the million-plus 911 calls Denver receives a year, an estimated 3% will be eligible. NBC News first visited social worker Carly Ceylon over the summer as the program got started. Now, 6 months later, a new report suggests STAR is working better than anyone could have anticipated.
People call 911 for a lot of different reasons, you know, law enforcement issues, crime, they need assistance, public health calls, resource calls, and just looking at sort of who really needs to respond to those calls.
During the pilot, the STAR team responded to 748 incidents, resulting in 0 arrests. 68% of the calls involved homelessness, 61% had mental health as the primary concern. The team was able to connect over 40% of those they responded to with shelters, crisis centers, or hospitals. Not once was a Denver PD called in to assist.
I think that people feel supported. I think they recognize that we're here to help them.
Take us through an example of a call that you think exemplifies the process and the purpose of this program.
Yeah, we had a call a couple weeks ago where there was a woman who was dealing with behavioral health symptoms who was at a 7-Eleven and was asked to leave and wouldn't leave. And clearly she was in behavioral health crisis and needed support. And I was able to talk to her and helped her out with some issues she was having with her benefits card, and we got her to a day shelter so she had somewhere to hang out where she wasn't going to pop up on the 911 radar.
Okay, so in thinking about like the amount of news that we have all seen recently surrounding like defunding police departments, public gun violence, and like mental health crises, I really like this particular example because it shows an alternative way to talk about it, right? So like I said, that's not perfect. It's only 3 minutes. There's only so much you can do, but they're very clearly foregrounding the response, right? They start right away with like what STAR is, where this is happening, how long the program has been running. They update that information throughout the course of the story. They provide multiple kinds of evidence. So they're talking about how there are no arrests affiliated with this program and why they consider that a success. Limitations are where this piece is weakest. Again, I think just because of time, but they do still mention like this is only like 3% of their calls. I feel quite confident that if we were to dig into the number of calls made to 911 in that area, more of them could probably be going to this sort of intervention program. So if they had more time, I think they could probably gone into resources. There's actually a lot of coverage of this program or Cahoots, a similar program that does go into more detail, but again, just for the sake of time today, I think that's a really great example of how to approach this. And maybe you agree with me on this, maybe you don't, but to me, one of the best things about that piece is that it doesn't feel different from like news, right? Like it sits very seamlessly into like a standard TV news program, which is the point, right? We don't want people to necessarily be able to say, first there's the news, and then there's the solutions news, because our point of view is that like solutions news is news, again, right? The whole story. There are people doing things to make things better around them, and that is just as much a part of the news as the statistics on who has been shot by the police. You with me? All right, I got a couple more slides, and then I'm just gonna save the rest of our time for some casual chatting. Everyone's favorite. Okay, so just to pull that together, like why does it matter, right? So we started by saying, how do you interact with the news as a news consumer? And I just wanted to back that up with some fun statistics for you. So 38% of US audiences, I think this is a 2019 statistic. I do have citations for all of this information. If you're interested in them, please send me an email and I'll send you the whole list. 38% of US audiences are saying they often or sometimes avoid the news. I think it's more than that at this point. And a full 63% of the public saying that they trust media either not very much or not at all, right? That they don't at all trust who is reporting current events to them. And that's across all forms of news media, print, television, all forms. And when audiences find that they decide they're going to check in on the news and all they see is like, you thought that your child was leaving a tooth for the tooth fairy, but actually it's for a murderer. Like when they're just getting these wild, alarmist stories, they trust news outlets even less, which is why you've been able to see that trust and faith in public news institutions going down over time. Right now, it's the lowest it's been since 2016, which I don't think is helping the health of our public sphere. However, that's not an unavoidable state of being, and there are things that news outlets can do about it like easily right now to fix it. So again, this is all coming directly from both some academic reporting. We have some journalism professors who on their own have been doing research on solutions journalism. The biggest one is at Virginia Commonwealth University, if you care. And then also just some other like research associations. So think like Pew, API, who are doing this kind of research. And they know over and over again that readers are saying they would engage more if the news presented solutions. And that they think that when news outlets actually spend time building genuine connections with community, it improves their ratings. So again, moving away from that parachute model, spending time talking to the people who are most impacted by a problem and not assuming you know what they're going to say, but really, really listening. And the data also tells us that solution stories are easier for audiences to understand, both in terms of self-report, they say they feel like they understand the issue better, and when like tested on the facts of a story, they do better when they're reading a solution story. They're shared more often, they're more likely to be shared out on social media. People are more likely to subscribe to full news outlets or to newsletters when they're using solutions approaches, and they're more likely to be read in full. People are spending more time per page, and they're more likely to click through the headline to see the full story. So some like really clear research here about how solutions journalism makes a huge difference. Everything on this page is coming from a study that SJN was directly involved in to provide a fair disclaimer, but it's not a study that we conducted. It's a study that we commissioned from Smith Geiger, which is an independent research firm. And this is all about TV reporting, which if you don't know is the most common way that American adults get their news. So comparing solutions journalism to more traditional problem-focused reporting, all the time, the solution story came out on top. So thinking about how trustworthy the story is, 83% of people said the solutions journalism story was something that they trusted, they thought it was correct, as opposed to only 55 trusted the problem-focused story. And these were all stories picked on the same topic, right? So for example, police violence. 88% said that the solutions piece created a positive first impression. They liked it. They thought it felt fair. It felt good, compared to 74% for the problem-focused stories. So it's not always that people felt really badly about traditional reporting, but they always felt significantly better about the solutions story. 61% found that solution story just interesting. So again, thinking about those click-through rates, that time spent on page, 54% for the problem-focused story, and just generally 10% more likely to say that the solution story changed their understanding of an issue. And one more time, that finding that solutions reporting makes people feel better informed, more likely to then take action in their community, and more willing to talk about the problems with their community, their family, their friends. We find that over and over again in research from different organizations, from different funders, from different perspectives. It is like amazingly clear and consistent. So I'm going to open us up for discussion in just a moment here, which is great, right on time. I'm going to put these links in the chat, but if you are interested in reading solutions journalism, you are in luck because I have a lot of places for you to find it. So I'm going to put a link to a blog post we did that just is a roundup of 54 outlets that are doing solutions journalism, either entirely dedicated to it. Yes, Magazine comes to mind. That's mostly environmental, but it's an entirely solutions outlet, or something like the New York Times that does a hefty amount of solutions reporting, and then all sorts of mid-level and focus pieces all in between. And then I also want to shout out our solutions story tracker. I'm going to put that link in here right now, which is just a search engine that we build. So reporters can submit, that's the story tracker that lives on our website, solutionsjournalism.org. Reporters submit stories that they did. So some of those are things that might have been funded by us, but certainly not all of them. That's not a requirement. And then we have specialists, we call them in-house, who vet them for those 4 pillars. So the story tracker is not meant to catalog every piece of solutions journalism that has ever been produced, but it is meant to be a resource for learners, audiences, and also reporters who are looking to learn more about what solutions journalism looks like. It's fun to play around with. There's like an advanced search option that's kind of fun to mess with. And I will give you the other link too. And then we also have a series of newsletters if you feel like you want in on that. There's too many of them. If you've ever worked for a nonprofit, you know how newsletters can kind of get out of control. But yeah, with that being said, our last 10 minutes is kind of just open for questions. Beverly, remind me what your question was. How solutions journalism has grown, how it's evolved.
How it evolved and what impact that it has had. I think was that my question? Like,
so
on like the Atlantic magazine and on New Yorker magazine, on those places that have those long involved articles.
We would love to have more of those like super high profile long form pieces doing more solutions journalism. That's not where it's most prominent. We do have pretty high pickup in, like I said, in the regional outlets. So thinking about like Denver, Charlotte, Richmond, right? Those sorts of like mid-tier American cities that still have local print outlets tend to be doing a lot more solutions journalism, or outlets that are like all digital or have some sort of more specific focus. So there's an all digital publication out of Philadelphia called the Philly Citizen that's entirely dedicated to solutions. They can do that because they have less like overhead, right? So they can start this outlet even when they're competing against oh no, the Philly flagship paper is escaping me. Even when they are in a city that has a flagship paper to compete with, they can still do that, right? So this is not a new concept. I said SJN started in 2013. Solutions journalism has been in place by that name probably since the late 80s, but this is really evolving out of some of the like public advocacy journalism movements and some of the citizen journalism movements that started happening in the 60s. If you want like all that whole history, I can definitely, again, email you a lot of that. Around the same time in the UK and Europe, they're calling their movement constructive journalism. It's arose by any other name, it's the same thing, right? So constructive journalism on the other side of the pond, solutions journalism here. We are working pretty significantly with a lot of reporters in Nigeria, Uganda, a couple other countries throughout Africa. So a lot of people who are starting new outlets and from the ground up are building in this solutions approach, which is really exciting. I do also work a lot with student reporters, like college reporters who intend to go on to become professional journalists. And what's really exciting about the solutions approach in working with like the next wave of professionals is that a lot of them have told me face-to-face, I was gonna quit. Like I was gonna change my major. All people wanted me to do was like talk about like death counts, and I'm not interested in that. Until I learned about this approach, and I learned that like I can go back home and talk about the things that are most important to me and my community and how we are making them better, and that there's a whole movement of people already trying to make that happen. That's always amazing to hear.
Lainey, do they sneak these articles in? You said the New York Times also.
So our founders, Tina and David, had a column in the NYT that ran for 10 years. It was called Fixes. I'm getting you a link. Here we go. So this is a column, so it's not necessarily always the hardest hitting, but that ran in the New York Times for, like I said, a full decade. It like just retired recently. No, I don't think anyone is like trying to backdoor it in. Some people do end up accidentally writing solutions. The biggest pushback we hear from reporters, the biggest pushback is resources, right? People are like, I don't have the time and the money and just the staff to embed people in a community like this, which is a hard problem to fix because it's so tied up with like the entire state of media and entertainment. And all of like the collapse of local news, which also feeds into distrust because consumers are more likely to trust local reporters, and then they've all gone away now. So it's all very like faceless and it feels very removed. But taking aside resources, because we can give people grants sometimes, but like that's very limited, and we're trying to move away from it because then once people are done with the grant, then they don't have resources still, so they stop doing it, right? Which is unsustainable. So beyond that, there's this real impression that doing solutions isn't what people want, which, as I've just said with my stats, is not true. So a lot of what we do at SJN is just education, saying like, hey, we know you have been taught by like other more experienced older reporters that people only want the news to be about death counts. But here's like all of our research that says that that's not true. There's a real fear from reporters that they're going to be perceived as like lobbyists or PR people if they're talking about solutions. So we talk a lot about the difference between covering a solution like that clip we just watched, which is very much not an advocacy piece by any means, and what it actually means to be like a PR person. So we talk about the difference a lot in how to do solutions journalism in a way that's foregrounding evidence, which is why I'm so hard on the 4 pillars. So there's some like real fears that come from journalists being trained in a very insular way, which I don't think is limited to journalism. I have a PhD. I know all about being trained in a very insular way. So I just think it's about breaking people out of some of the habits. That's why I'm so excited when I get to work with the student reporters and kind of snatch them before they have been fully inoculated into harmful patterns. 7 o'clock, I am so good. Okay, one more time, everybody. My email is lane@solutionsjournalism.org. Send me an email if you want citations, if you want more reading, if you just want to say hello. That is it. Shoot me a message. I'm actually only at SJN for another 2 months because I am also grant funded and my grant is running out. But for the next 2 months, I am here and available. Please sign up for one of the newsletters. A lot of them are super cool and we don't spam you or share your information. So it's been so great to have you all here with me for the ride. Thanks for sharing your time with me.
So glad you were here. Thank you.
I mean, Lainey, we'll want to maybe put we have this world map of places that are doing solution focused work, but not necessarily solution focused. Would be great to be able to add your organization on that map. Yeah, I would love that. I think I need to connect you to one of my superiors for that, especially since I'm leaving. But yeah, we would definitely love that. Okay, so probably Julia will connect with you and she'll send you the link and then you can see where that goes. Okay. Yeah, great. Julia, I did record this session, so let me know if I should send that to. That would be great. Yes, please. Great. Have a good night, day, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Bye.